I really, really love working on colors in Lightroom. I think that's what makes the photo different and better also. Because, when it comes to light, you can enhance it, you can make it a little bit better, but the light needs to be there already in the raw file. Like when you're shooting inside, outside, wherever you are, you need to find that beautiful light already. So that needs to be in your raw file. But then the colors, you can always make them a little bit better.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the My Food Lens podcast. And today we are talking about something which is very, very essential if we want to improve our photography and in turn we want to impact and improve our business. Today we are going to talk all about Lightroom, editing and everything else that comes along with acquiring this powerful skill. And we have a fantastic guest who is absolutely perfect to talk on this topic. She is Roberta. Roberta is a food photographer and a travel photographer who's based in Italy. Roberta is also an educator. She offers one-on-one mentoring sessions for those who are looking to build a successful business. But more than that, she has a signature Lightroom course. She is extremely passionate about editing, and she actually is one of the very few people who in the industry bridge the gap between creativity and business through the lens of editing. She's going to tell us all about the technical aspects of Lightroom and how it can improve our photography. But at the same time, she's going to tell us how improving those technical skills can in turn improve our business, get us more income, attract more clients, and basically set us up for success. All right, with that, let's welcome Roberta. Hi, Roberta, and welcome to the My Food Lens podcast. What an absolute delight to have you on the show. And this is extra special for me for two reasons. Number one, you're a dear friend. And secondly, I don't think that we have had this discussion or we have discussed this topic on the podcast before. And I think you are the absolute perfect person to come and talk to us about it today. Because when I look at your photography, it is so distinct. And when I look at it even more deeply, when I look at your style, I find it far more distinct. So I feel like you are one of those very few people who actually look at editing as a tool that bridges two different worlds. It bridges the creative world with the entrepreneurial world. You are one of the very few people who actually talks about editing not just as a skill to improve your photography, but also as a resource, as a tool to grow your business, find new opportunities, and to really maximize on, learning this one particular skill that can skyrocket our creative journey and our entrepreneurial journey. So I think you're the perfect person to talk about it. I'm so pumped to get into this conversation today. And with that, welcome, Roberta.
Thank you. Very, very happy, very, very, very honored, very embarrassed also. You have so many beautiful words for me, but those are all very true, like what you said, that, editing is one of the tools that will allow you to also get more opportunities. That's my thought, at least. So thank you again Very, very happy to be here.
Yes. And I think our audience is going to be super pumped because they are going to hear it right from the horse's mouth. You are a Lightroom ambassador. You have been right, in the deep trenches of, exactly how the
Yeah.
application works. And at the same time, you have built your own business. And one of your strengths is really editing. So I'm just going to start right at the top, Roberta. Can you just, very
Mm-hmm.
quickly tell us why is editing even important?
I think this is at least how I start also my course, like understanding that there's a gap between the raw file to the final photo. And that is why I always start by explaining the importance of the raw file, like what it is. I always give the analogy of the cake and the ingredients because the raw file is the collection of ingredients, right? You have a collection of information, a collection of data in the raw file that then you need to transform, to process to get to the final result, the wow photo, So the analogy that I bring usually is to make the final cake. It's not that you just collect the ingredients and that's the cake. You have the ingredients, the flour, the milk, the eggs, the sugar, but then you need to process them to get the delicious final cake. And to me, editing, like I said already, it's not an optional, unluckily or luckily. Luckily for people like me that enjoy editing, because I'm obsessed with editing, because it allows you to bring also your creative vision. And that's what really makes you stand out in general. Like it's an expression of yourself. But editing in general, I think it's important again because you need to transform that file that your camera gives you into something. So that file that you see in your camera or when you're tethering on your computer is not the final photo. So I always also remind people that it's okay if it doesn't look awesome, beautiful, you need to edit it. And that is why it's important. It's the cherry on the cake. That's the final step. And it's not optional again.
I love it. And you call it the cherry on top, and I call it the finishing touch. That's how I always call it.
Absolutely.
You cannot finish anything without that touch. And you here have spoken like a true food photographer, giving us the example, the analogy of a cake. I love it. I will never forget this for life. And I don't think that, anyone could have spoken about this very serious technical topic with so much fun, talking about it with like cake and ingredients. And I think it is so easy to understand that that picture that you've taken is just an ingredient. Now you got to make that photo, So editing is that tool.
Yes, that's true. And there's, distinction that I like to make usually between color correction and color grading. And color grading, I said a few months ago on my Instagram, is like umami. You know that umami gives the extra touch to food. That's the sixth, if I'm right, the sixth sense. And it makes everything more complex, more delicious. It's mouth-watering, something that has more umami. And recently, one of my students told me, when you said that, I understood color grading. And I know it's a very simple metaphor, whatever you want to call it. But truly, when you understand that color grading can make your photos look better and unique and more complex and more delicious, you understand how it works. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but truly, like I was super happy when my student told me, I understood when you talked about umami, like color grading being like umami in food, I understood what it does.
Yeah, and I did too. So thank you for that. Really, it is such a great way to explain something. I mean, we can use all the technical words in the world, but just speaking in the language of food, which all of us tuning in right now, all of us listening, definitely relate to it. And suddenly it just becomes so much clear on the importance and the impact that, these little adjustments or these small things that Lightroom can achieve for us. So when you're talking about umami, you're saying that it's that extra. It's that extra. It's going to add that extra.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the workflow. At what point does the basic come in, and at what point does the extra come in? So what do you think is involved in a workflow, and how important is it to have an efficient workflow in editing?
I love this question, actually. And you reminded me that the same student that I was talking about before, she told me it's actually not just about the umami, it's about, the layers that you add to that photo, just like with food. When creating a recipe, not that today I want to talk about food, but I think that your audience understands better when we talk about food. And I'm in your audience too, by the way. So we understand better when we talk about food. But when you create a dish, the more like small touches, like the finishing touches that you talked about before, and the more layers you add and the more complex you make it, the more delicious that final dish would be. It's the same thing with photos and editing, in my opinion. So, and going back to the workflow, by the way, I think that in my case, and I realized this also about 2 weeks ago, when I went to San Francisco with Adobe, it was a group of 25 photographers. And at one point, we talked about our workflow. And I realized in that moment that my mind, my brain, whatever you want to call it, needs a very simple and straightforward workflow, editing workflow, photography workflow, et cetera, which is very different from maybe another photographer's workflow. So, in my opinion, to go back again to the question, it's really important that you have a very straightforward editing workflow because it's efficient. Okay, self-explanatory, but it allows you to also save time. And this becomes very important, especially when you're working with clients, because you are being paid also for your time. So if you know that you have a strong, efficient workflow, you know exactly what you have to do when you launch Lightroom. You know that you have to select the photos, you flag them, you rate them, you do whatever you want. That's your system. Personally, I use the flag method. You can also use the stars. But when you know exactly what you need to do, that makes everything easier, quicker. You will deliver the result faster. Simple. Yeah. So instead of taking one morning to edit all the photos, maybe it will take you 30 minutes. Of course, it depends how many photos you have, but it can take less. Like what I want to say is that when you know exactly what to do, what you have to do, it will be faster.
Of course, yes.
Okay, so that's the...
and your turnaround time for projects is much lower. You can take on more projects, and that way you're making more money because you're taking on more because you know that you are efficient and that, it's, how much time something takes you and a project will take you. So it's the same in photography, right? I mean, we have to have a photography workflow when we cook, when we prep our food, how we choose our backdrops, how we position camera angle or lighting. All these decisions are also part of workflow. And I think almost everybody who's probably tuning in has taken at least one photo in their life. And so they all understand the importance of workflow. And all they need to do is understand that we just need to translate that same system into editing as well. Because editing, again, speaking from experience, can be very time-taking. Because, if you are not right? Has it I know that in the beginning, I was all over the place. Also because I was learning the application.
I agree.
But until now, after a few years, I can say that I have a system. I know exactly how I roll, but it was not like that. And I know the amount of time it can take.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I think, like you said, it's partially due to the fact that you don't know exactly sometimes where to find the tools because of the lack of experience, maybe, which is totally normal, by the way. And that is also why it becomes very important, in my opinion, to know deeply the software, know exactly where to find that specific tool. Because when you know it, You go, take the tool, apply it, that's it. It's like when you go into a room and you're looking for your things. If you know that you always place the keys in that spot, you go, you take the keys, you're out. Instead, if you're messy, if you don't really have a system, you could spend 5 minutes looking for those keys. I don't know if you noticed, but I really love the analogies and the metaphors.
Yes,
That
of
works for me
course.
to really understand
Oh, I
the
don't think
concept.
anyone's going to forget these analogies ever. These are wonderful. Please use more of them. We need to hear, and we're going to
Yeah.
absorb so much more, so thank you for that. But, so tell us, since we are on this, you're saying that, we really need to know some of our features. We need to know the interface and we need to familiarize ourselves. Just on that note, can you tell us what would be some of the most powerful features that photographers or anyone who's using Lightroom should be aware of?
So first of all, I want to say that it's been a while since I switched from Lightroom Classic to the other version of Lightroom. And I know that this can create confusion sometimes because, people wonder, what is that version? Like Lightroom Classic, and then there's the other one, and then there's the other one, which is mobile. So just to explain briefly, there's Lightroom Classic, which is probably what majority of people use. There's a Lightroom Desktop, which on your computer, it should be the LR icon. Lightroom Classic is the LRC icon. And then there's Lightroom Mobile, which you can find on your phone, iPhone, whatever phone you have, or on your iPad too, on your tablet. There's also a web version, but I don't know how many people use the web version. I think that we are more used to the classic one and the desktop one. And I switched completely to the desktop version because it's much more intuitive. And I could bet here now the majority of people that use Lightroom Classic never went past the develop tab, the develop window in Lightroom Classic. You have the library, all the catalogs, etc. The develop, and then there was something else, which I think it was like slideshow, something else.
Yes. Web and a few other things. Yes.
And when I realized that I was not really using a lot of those things, maybe because of my workflow, maybe because I needed to simplify things for me, I switched. And now with Lightroom desktop version, I have everything on that window, everything in there. It's very user friendly. I also think that people have their own workflows already. So I'm not forcing anyone to switch. But if you need something much more intuitive, much more straightforward, user friendly, and especially that syncs everything between your laptop, your iPad, your phone, whatever, the desktop version is amazing in my opinion, because you have the cloud and everything is synced between the across the devices.
I'm a Lightroom Classic person. I'm the classic person.
I know a lot. Yeah, I was too.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And I've just been that for so many years. So I think this is definitely worth checking out, exploring.
Yeah, it's definitely something that took me a little bit of time, especially because I was very used to Lightroom Classic and I was scared also of switching. But it's much more intuitive, and especially, again, like I told you before, my brain needs to simplify things.
Yes.
And the catalog system for me was not really working properly. So now with the cloud system, I'm much more confident. But there's also the other side, that I talked to people, again, when I was in San Francisco, that said, maybe I have trust issues in the cloud because, the cloud something like abstract. You don't know where the photos are. So you need trust, of course, in the cloud that your photos are there. Of course, there's always a backup of the images on an external hard drive. That's for sure. But all the photos now are on my cloud. That's it. I don't have any more catalogs to worry for. And that works for me. Again, it really needs to work for you, for your system. And just to give you another example, if you're used to Tether, for example, Lightroom Desktop doesn't have that option, currently at least. Now, so if you're used to Tether, then maybe you definitely can keep Lightroom Classic or other softwares, of course. But yeah, it's very, very easy, very, very straightforward. I find it, maybe it's a coincidence, but I find it, I kind of switched when I started traveling more. And when you start traveling more, when you need maybe things on your phone, on your iPad, on your laptop, all synced, that's, I know, probably it's a coincidence again, but it was really, really handy to have everything across the devices again. Yeah.
That is a fantastic, fantastic insight. Like, so many of us do not realize this. Like, for me, I have a streamlined workflow in Classic. I'm happy there. I'm just going to sit and keep doing my thing. But suddenly this is like, oh, wow, especially when you're traveling, especially when when you want to do like a quick edit and, you just want it on your phone really quickly. Maybe you're waiting for a train or a bus or at the airport and you just want something very quick synced. You can have your post ready. Maybe you need to deliver a client project very quickly. And that's it. Boom, boom, boom. It just goes through. I love this. Such a great insight.
It happens, like you said, for example, I mostly shoot with natural light still. I love it. I love natural light. So maybe for clients, I shoot right before lunch. And I know, again, because I love editing, I know that I just want to edit the photos as soon as possible. So after lunch, when I have a little bit of time, I start editing the photos on my iPad because I have it here somewhere. I know that your audience is not going to see it, but I have the adapter here. Anyway, with the adapter, you connect it to your iPad or your iPhone, especially if you have Apple devices, it's all USB-C.
Yes.
They are all the same. So you use the adapter, you connect the SD card, you add the photos on mobile or on your iPad.
Yeah.
I start editing, but then the final look, I give it on the laptop for my clients.
Yes.
So that's what I do. I start editing on my laptop, and then I look, like after a couple hours, maybe I take a look on the laptop. If there's some retouching to do, I go and edit in Photoshop. That's my workflow. It's very, again, straightforward, quick. And when you're traveling, again, if, for example, I'm traveling somewhere and I want to post photos on my Instagram stories, I know that I can do that very easily. I connect the phone, again, the SD to my phone. I edit. Many times I apply my presets. I don't sell presets. That's something about me that I really much care about teaching you how to edit instead of selling presets. So, but I create my own presets.
Yes.
And one click, you adjust a few things, and then you post on the stories. That's it.
Wonderful. And I've seen that. I've seen, like, when you've been traveling, like, especially I was seeing you in Japan. When you were in Japan, you were posting these, stories of street photography and, capturing people in monasteries and fire and food. And I was just like, you're there. You're still, you're not waited to come back home and sit and edit that whole batch. Like, literally, we are seeing these photos live a day in and day out as you're experiencing them. And I think that is so powerful because we are always in constant need of content or to, have that turnaround time for our projects. But Robert, if I had to ask you, like, certain features, not just in different versions of Lightroom, but even in terms of, the big game changing or the big boss features of Lightroom, maybe top 5, what would be those?
Yes, the tone curve. I love the tone curve. I think that I almost always, I almost always keep the basic panel for the highlights, shadows, blacks and whites adjustments. I go straight to the tone curve because that allows you to be very, 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 very precise. And that's the main difference between the basic panel and the tone curve.
Right.
What else? Well, the color grading panel. I think that requires a little bit of practice, especially at the beginning. And usually, what I recommend is getting curious about and being fascinated by the whole color psychology theme. I think it's super fascinating. Probably you agree with me, but the color psychology, the meaning of colors, it really becomes important. And I always teach to my students that storytelling, like it needs to transfer to your editing too. And by knowing what you communicate, by knowing storytelling, by knowing your what, your why, your whatever, it will become also more easy to use the color grading panel or to do the color grading in general. That's my thought. Yes, it's really important to, and especially again, be curious about the meaning of color. I always say that, like you could spend hours studying on books, meaning of color red, the meaning of the combination of color red and color green together. And that really helps with adding colors in the color grading panel.
Yeah.
Number 3, I would say masks.
Yes.
They are so powerful. They are very powerful. And I remember that a while ago, I told myself, why don't you try and edit a photo only using masks? And then, I applied the lens correction and the white balance correction, but that's it. And only using masks. And, it's not that you can always do that, but in a lot of photos, you can still use masks and create only use masks and create beautiful results. They are very powerful,
right?
Especially because you can select very small areas. You can be very precise. I think another powerful tool, if we want to combine number 1 and number 3, is that you can add a tone curve into the mask.
Yeah.
So if you need to adjust a certain area, you can use the tone curve.
Yes.
So those are the 3 main ones.
Okay, great.
And then the color mixer, of course, which is the HSL panel in Lightroom Classic, is always my favorite because you can go and tweak the colors. I really love working on colors in Lightroom. I think that's what makes the photo different and better also. Because, when it comes to light, you can enhance it, you can make it a little bit better, but the light needs to be there already in the raw file. Like when you're shooting, inside, outside, wherever you are, you need to find that beautiful light already. So that needs to be in your raw file. But then the colors, you can always make them a little bit better.
Of course.
So that's powerful.
I love it. And there was a reason why I said the things that I said in the beginning. And one of them was that you are one of the very few people who actually bridge the gap between the creative and the business world. And this is exactly what I was talking about. How many people talk about storytelling in Lightroom? Very few. And you brought it up. And also something that I said was that your editing style is very distinct. And honestly, for someone who understands color grading, they can really see with their minute eye that there is a sense of that color grading that goes into your editing. So if we look at your photos, we can tell that, there is that artistic touch or that sense that, or you have used that tool, but it's used so beautifully that it becomes your signature style, that it makes you distinct, that it, kind of elevates your photography level. So I want you to tell us just a little bit more about this relationship between editing and storytelling, because for most photographers, storytelling begins at the photography level and it ends right after the composition is done and the photo is taken. It is not carried through in editing, or that's not what they are thinking about in editing. So tell us, what is this relationship that we need to carry up until the end?
I love this question. It's very complex, like the umami that we said before. So first of all, I also want to say it's not that you have to apply color grading every single time, because if you think about it, if you're working for a client that hires you to create photos for their e-commerce and you need to photograph the product, the food product, for that catalog, for the e-commerce on a plain backdrop, at that point, what you do in Lightroom or other software, you correct the raw file. You
Right.
don't really apply an aesthetic. You don't really apply the emotions also, to the photo. It's probably not required. But when you want to give a little extra again, or maybe it's an editorial photo
Yes.
where you know that
Artistic.
you have to
A little bit
communicate
artistic, I would
something.
say. Yes.
Yes. Yes. It can also be commercial work, where you need to add that aesthetic. At that point, color grading becomes really, really important, and storytelling can help you with that. How, you're asking?
Yes,
Well,
tell
in
us.
my opinion, like we said before, the power of color, if you think about it, if you have a warmer photo versus a cooler photo, that's already different. Like one gives you more cozy vibes, more comfort, warmth, self-explanatory. The other one is more refreshing, more, it can also evoke winter time. I don't know. Or maybe a photo that has been shot in Northern Europe. These are just a few examples. But thinking about the meaning of those colors and what they communicate, you then can enhance that vibe, that story, that message in Lightroom. How? By applying, for example, certain colors to the color grading panel, or maybe you make the single colors a little bit more on the warm side or on the cool side. An example, if you have green photo, like I don't know, you took a photo, monochromatic photo of a pesto pasta. I think about my pesto pasta now, on a green backdrop. So everything is green. And then you want to make that pasta. I'm brainstorming with you right now, literally.
Yes.
Thinking
I love
about
it.
an example.
I love it.
You want to give the photo a little bit of a more fresh feeling. You can take that single color, the green, on the HSL panel or the color mixer panel, and you can move it on the cool side a little bit. You never want to do, to overdo. You never want to go with the crazy adjustment. So I think that the two are strongly connected, color grading and storytelling. Because once you know the story, once you know what you want to communicate, then you can translate it when you are in Lightroom editing your photo.
And you're just evoking emotions. I mean, emotions is everything in photography, and we are carrying through. We are translating that, and we are continuing to convey those emotions through the selection of our tones, our colors, and palettes. So for me, I wanted to say two things here. One is I always move towards a cooler palette. So for me, I will always cool down my white balance, and I will have more magentas and blues. And for me, that brings a really high energy into the photos. There's a bit of high contrast. There's a sense of movement to it. And so it also depends on where I live. I live in the hot tropics, and I kind of, sway towards this kind of like this cool temperature in my photos. And there is rarely a time when I have gone towards a warmer tone. It just doesn't feel like it's natural to me. So it's, again, part of the storytelling, and it's very inherent to our style as well. The color that we are going with.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to mention about color grading is it's really hard. It is not easy. It is actually one of the trickiest tools to use in Lightroom based on my experience. And I feel like there have been times where I have loved it and how it's, turned out, and how the highlights and the shadows, and I can separate some of those things out with cool warms. But, like you said, there have been places where I've thought, this doesn't elevate my photo. This is not making it look better. And sometimes we need to also stay true to the color of the food. I think that is very important.
Yes.
So we can play around and we can be artistic about it. But at the same time, like you said, our green pesto pasta should not look like a brown pesto that has been sitting out for hours just because we added that warm tone to it. So,
Yeah.
I
Or
feel
a
like,
blue pesto.
or yeah, exactly, or just gone too far and looking too cool and
Yes.
energetic. So I feel like it is also a tricky tool, but at the same time, we kind of, as much as we explore, we kind of find that balance of what works where. And like you said, the most important part is knowing what is available to us and then honing in and
Yes.
maximizing its use. So, on that note, Roberta, I want to pick your brain on what the whole world is talking about, and that is AI. And Lightroom
Ooh.
has, yeah. And I know that you have been like kind of, playing around with it. And I know there was a little bit of Photoshop playing around, a little bit of Lightroom from what I recall. And I know that, you have kind of explored it a little bit. So tell us what has been your study and what you think about in general AI, powerful features, go that route or avoid that route. What do you have to say?
Go.
Ah!
Don't avoid, go.
Yeah, because there
No,
is no
my thought
choice.
is that, yeah, no, there is choice for sure. But two things I want to say is that, again, in San Francisco, when I was at the Adobe office, what I said was, and what I noticed is that all us photographers, professional photographers, we are less scared of AI compared to maybe someone that is not really familiar, a common person that is not doing this job. I think we are much less scared about it. And one of the Adobe people, also, I don't remember the name, but he said that AI is not here to steal our job, especially when we talk about Lightroom. Now we're talking about Lightroom. We're not talking about recreating stuff from zero. I'm not an expert on that. I played around with Midjourney, those
Mhm,
AI apps, but
mhm,
then I stopped because it was not really my interest, at
mhm,
least not now.
mhm,
But when we're talking about AI in Lightroom, in Photoshop, in the editing softwares in general, I think that what he said is that it's not here to steal our job, but to make it better. And if you
mhm,
think about it, the AI tools that we have in Lightroom, in Photoshop, they are here to make things better. If
mhm,
you think about the masks that you can find, like the object mask, the subject, the sky, the ones that are powered by AI, they are helping you. They are
mhm,
helping you detect the subject. They are helping you detect the sky, which is, trust me, it's really helpful. Now that I'm traveling a little bit more, that I'm shooting more, landscape, it's phenomenal to just select the sky. The background, mask,
mhm,
etc. They help us. So I
mhm.
think that we should go for it,
Yeah.
And in terms of, instead of recreating things from zero, let's say, I don't have, again, experience about that, but there's a photographer instead that I know that he's very, like, he started doing like discovering and studying the whole AI Midjourney thing from the very beginning. And what I found out because of him is that sometimes it's really helpful because it allows you to save time. Because if you think about it, a scenario, if you are hired again to shoot a food product and then the client wants, I don't know, 10 different backdrops, to see how the food product looks on that backdrop. Of course, you have to deliver the result, right? So you can either choose to change the backdrop every single time for 10 times. That's time consuming. Even though it's just about changing the backdrop, it takes time. Or you can photograph the food product on a plain backdrop, normal backdrop, and then you can think about recreating a different backdrop with the AI. So with Midjourney, whatever it is. So that's how that photographer is using that tool, is using AI. But to go back to Lightroom, I think that AI features in Lightroom and Photoshop are great. That's my
Mhm,
thought. And about saving time, it helped me save time, like a lot of time. The generative tool in Photoshop, the retouching tool. Personally,
mhm,
I use it as a retouching tool. I don't
mhm,
use it again to generate crazy stuff. I use it as a retouching tool. And if you think about it, for us food photographers, if something is not perfect, especially if you're doing everything from the cooking to the food styling to the photographing, etc., if a recipe doesn't look really nice and perfect, you have two choices. At least for what I see right now, you have two choices. You can make it again. Maybe it's a cake, it's not perfect. The texture is a little bit, I don't know, it's ruined. It doesn't look super pretty in some of the parts, like some parts of the cake. So you can make it all over again. That means hours again. And your client hired you for a certain amount of time instead. Or you can maybe turn that cake when you're styling the scene, so that you cannot see those ruined parts. And then if there's something to retouch, you can move it to Photoshop and just avoid making the cake all over again. So again, in a lot of times it happened that maybe a recipe was not really perfect. The chocolate was a little bit melted. The cake was not perfect again. The honey on top of the pancakes was not perfect. Anyway, whatever example that you have, most of the times I ask myself, can I take it to Photoshop and adjust it and make it look natural though? Or should I do all over again? And when I know that the answer to the first question is yes, I try that route that way. I try in Photoshop. And that's how AI can help us. We don't have to be scared.
Yeah. And that's what I meant by we don't have a choice. What I meant is that AI is here to stay and we don't have a choice because the sooner we embrace it in the right way, the better it is for us. And, we are not going to be able to go around this. And whether it's editing or it is writing or it is something else, AI is here to stay. So how can it help us?
Yes.
For me, I use AI a lot in Lightroom for the healing or, for removing objects or things like that, which are not as big as, big things obviously would move to Photoshop. But for me, even within Lightroom, like I've had a whole donut disappear from my backdrop. And that was amazing because, suddenly it was a new photo and I'm like, wow, I love it. And then, had all these holes in the chocolate and things like that, which was like, boom, gone. And my ice cream that was melted was suddenly scooped up. So it was like fantastic, So I love the AI feature in Lightroom. To be honest, in general, I like AI because I feel like it's kind of our personal assistant. It really is. We just have to know how to use it. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier. You said that you bring things to Photoshop and then as long as it looks natural, you go ahead and do it.
Yes.
Now, this is something that, photographers can tend to make things look a little bit not natural. It is very easy to kind of, go overboard while editing because we're just being artistic. We're just playing around. It's all subjective, right? But can you tell us what are some of these common places where photographers kind of tend to over edit or they get very heavy handed with their editing?
Yeah, for sure. Like, especially at the beginning, maybe you tend to move that slider too much on the right or on the left, and it's easy to overdo. I think the clarity is the main one. And I'm guilty of that too. Like at the beginning, I used to move the clarity a little bit too much on the right. And that means a lot more contrast. And that means that, it can result in a fake-ish, effect that you give the photo. So you never want to do too much. You always want to move the slider a little bit at a time. And so that's the first one, the clarity for sure. And especially remember about the clarity that enhances the texture in your photo. So if you increase it too much, that's going to be very distracting because you have a lot going on in your photo. And I think it's valid for our food photos. I think it's valid for street photos, for portrait, for example. Portrait
my goodness.
Like if you increase the clarity, you see the pores on your skin.
Yes.
Landscape photos. So yeah, it's true that it's subjective, but sometimes it's just too much.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
move it a little bit at a time.
mm-hmm,
What else? Well, also the warmth or the coolness of
mm-hmm,
a photo. You
mm-hmm.
never want to have a photo that is blue or
Yes.
yellow
Or
when
green.
you're adjusting, or green or purple. So
Yeah.
if, of course, unless it's very, very artistic, like, sometimes allow me to talk also about other niches that are not only food photos, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in portrait photos or fashion photography, like the outcome, like the photos need to be very colorful and artistic. So in that case, maybe it's justified. But in our case, like you said before, the food needs to look realistic and natural. We never want to make it look orange if it was white, for
Yeah.
example, or make it look blue if it was white. So that's another thing to pay attention
Mm.
to. And the same thing goes for all the wheels in the color grading panel.
Yeah.
So be careful to the level of saturation of the colors that you had. What else? There was another. Oh, the lens blur.
Mm.
So especially when they launched the lens blur last year, and especially if you do it on mobile, it's a little bit less precise compared to the desktop version or the classic version. So it's easy to have a very, very, very fake effect.
Mm.
Because the thing is
Mm-hmm.
that when you select the point of
Yeah.
focus in Lightroom for the lens blur, it's not always precise, and sometimes the depth of field is not really recognized. So it
Yeah.
gives you kind of the
Yeah.
blurred on the foreground, the blurred on the. So it's really easy to make it fake. What I
Mm-hmm.
noticed, I quite never use it to be honest. What I noticed is that it really works well when you already have in your photo a nice depth of field with a nice blurred background, and your
Mm-hmm.
subject is nicely, separated, let's say. That works fine.
Mm.
But yeah, sometimes it's just too fake. And I've seen examples, and I am guilty of that too, that, sometimes it's easy to have
Yeah.
that not realistic effect, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Something that I really want our listeners to pay attention to is we are talking all about editing and adjustments and correction. And the only thing that is again and again coming up is make it look natural. It should look natural. It should feel real. It
Yes,
should not look fake.
yes,
So something to take away is no
yes.
matter how much of a master of editing you are, at the end of the day, when you have that final product of a photo, it should really look like food and realistic and relatable and something that a viewer can transport themselves into, not something that is
Yeah.
not believable. And, like, for example, like you talked about color. For me, I often find green color is so, oversaturated in so many photos. And suddenly that green is
Mm,
just so green that somebody looks at it and they're like, put off. And suddenly you'll be like, that's not even real.
mm,
Like, someone's just really gone too far. So wherever we are, whether it's color you said, whether it's blurring, whether it's clarity, whether it's texture, sometimes just being heavy handed on texture makes it look so dry. All that
yeah.
softness and the glossiness is just lost. So at the end of the day, with all our editing, we are just trying to make it look natural and easy and effortless.
Yes, that's true. And you made me think about, you made me remember about one thing that it took me ages to actually move the slider, the clarity slider, to the other side, to the left, because we
Mm,
always increase it, but then we
mm,
never decrease it. So now it's been probably a couple years since I started, sometimes move the slider to the left. That means that you're decreasing the
yeah,
texture a little bit. I love doing that when I'm, for example, selecting my main subject, the main plate of pasta again, for
yeah,
example.
yeah,
And so I create two masks,
yeah.
one mask for the main subject, which is
Mm-hmm,
usually a round one, a radial
mm-hmm,
gradient.
mm-hmm.
And I increase the texture just a tiny little bit. But then I click on duplicate and invert, and I decrease the texture a little bit. So that allows you to kind of decrease the texture, of course, of the backdrop, and that makes the viewer focus on the main subject.
Yeah.
And that's something that I do. Yeah.
I do the same
And
with
in
clarity, though. I feel like,
yeah.
because so I create this little bit of clarity contrast between the main subject and the backdrop. And I feel like this, like you said, it makes a subject pop and it creates this depth. It's just so subtle, but it's creating that depth, whether in terms of texture and just a little bit of that, instead of using that blur or something, you are creating that contrast and that sense, which looks beautiful. I think this is such a great tip. I love it.
But also
Yes, tell me.
Yeah, please allow me to say also, like in other types of photos, especially again, since the moment I started traveling more, that I have other types of photos, people, landscape, etc. When I want to add that dreamy effect, then I decrease the clarity, like overall.
Right.
I don't even really focus on the specific subject. Maybe I create a tiny little mask for the subject to increase the texture a little bit, but then to give that soft look to the image overall, decreasing the clarity is very nice. Very nice effect.
And we need to play around more with it and just see what it's really doing.
Yes.
Some of the food is softer texture and we don't want it to look really dry and sharp and, in your face. We want that little softness. So I love it. And just on this topic of, going heavy-handed or over-editing and talking about masks, can you tell us a little bit about, certain mistakes or certain places where photographers kind of miss out on using masks powerfully or maybe making certain mistakes while using masks?
So I like to teach usually to my students that whenever you think about an adjustment, there's at least two ways to do the exact same thing in Lightroom. At least. So for example, can I ask you now, like if you want to select that plate of pasta in your photo, how can you do that? Like using the masks. Can we like name all the masks that we can use?
Okay, so for me, like it's a plate of pasta. So the first thing I would do is the radial mask, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to say all of them. I could paint over it. I could invert and just, isolate that part by inverting a mask.
Yeah.
What else?
That's already three. That's already three.
Yeah.
Then we have the subject mask.
Okay.
Then we have the object mask. So we have many, many ways to select the same thing.
Right.
And I think the mistake, I wouldn't call it necessarily mistake, but I would say that the main thing would be to know the one that is the most efficient to select that part. What I mean to say is that, for example, like I said before, if I need to edit a landscape photo, I know that if I want to edit the sky, probably the first one to click on is the sky mask without brushing on top of the photo. That can be time consuming sometimes. Another way that you have to do it is, for example, select the subject and then duplicate and invert.
Right.
And that's just a couple ways, So in the plate of pasta example, the first one that I could think about is the object mask, or like you said, the radial gradient mask, because, and that's another probably mistake, you always want, going back to the natural effect, etc., you always want the natural effect. You never want something that is too evident also. So those would be my two first choices. Object or subject also, or radial, like you said, because the radial one allows you to also fade the mask. And by fading, you have a more natural result.
Yeah.
If you go instead with the subject or object, that is more for very precise adjustments, like, I don't know, the texture again. But if it was to increase the exposure, probably I would go with the radial one, again, to have a more natural result. So it's more faded,
So selection of masks
so those
is
are
very important. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
The kind of mask,
Yeah.
because we
Like
always
the right
wanted to
mask.
look natural, and we wanted to kind of also relate back to the shape of the food. Like for me, plate of pasta, plate is
Yes.
typically round, so a radial would make more sense. But sometimes,
Yes.
maybe it's a different thing. But yeah, I understand. I think this is so important because we don't want those sharp, harsh lines. We want that feathering to really show through. What else? What else comes to your mind about masks?
What else? Oh, another powerful tool, in my opinion, that maybe it's a mistake not using it is the intersect tool. You know that you can create a mask and then click on intersect with. I don't know why, I have a feeling that it's underestimated. So, for example, again, if we have that plate of pasta and we have, I don't know, some tomatoes in it, we can create the radial gradient mask. We can select the plate of pasta and then click intersect with. For example, you can click color red. That's another one that it's underestimated. The color mask and the luminance mask. I feel like it's very, very, very precise. And most people tend to only use brush, linear, gradient. That's it. Instead, there's so much going on in the mask panel. Like you have so much that you can do. So the intersect is really, really a really, really nice tool to use. And that allows you to isolate specific parts of the mask,
Right.
Yeah.
And so you talked about like exploring all these different things, and I feel like this is so important, especially when we are coming up with our own workflow, and ultimately it leads to our own editing style. We all have a signature style, right? But tell me, like, I'm just going to jump right into a point where I assume people have established an editing style. How do we bring variety? And let's say we have different kind of clients. Like sometimes we are shooting for packaging, sometimes we are shooting for editorial, sometimes we have something that's going to go on a billboard. We have so many different types of clients, foods, colors, resolutions and purposes for which we are shooting. How do we create like different editing styles, or do we need even different editing styles? What are the places where we can begin to hone in or cut back to be able to create these variations in our editing? So that was part one of our conversation with Roberta. And tell me that you learned so much and there were so many aha moments, because me, as someone who's been using Lightroom for so many years, also learned something new. I mean, right from understanding AI to the technical features to how we can make mistakes while editing and the whole idea of storytelling in editing. Oh my God, how powerful is that? So we're going to continue this powerful conversation. And before I tell you about that, let me remind you that Roberta has a fantastic course on Lightroom and she's offering a 10% discount. So we're going to link it in the show notes. Go check it out. Go look at the course. I can guarantee you that it will most definitely transform not just your editing, but also your business and your creative style. All right. And we're going to continue this powerful conversation in part 2 of the episode, where we are going to talk a lot about the impact of editing on our business. How does it help us attract more clients, create higher value content, and showcase that value to our clients? So it's going to get bigger, better, and juicier. And I will see you next week with another episode. All right. In the meantime, if you have any questions, email me at hello@myfoodlens.com or DM me on Instagram at Dyutama_myfoodlens. All right. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.